So we are now going to move on to our second panel discussion of the day. So this is going to be chaired by Jenny Durrant, and we're going to be hearing all about finding meaning and purpose through disposals, and just thinking about how we can maybe reassess how things are done and make things a normal part of everyday collections management. So I'm now going to invite our panel to turn their cameras on and join me on screen. And I'm going to hand over to Jenny to chair. Thanks all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Hello. Lovely to see all my panelists here. And it's it's wonderful to be here for this session today. I'm Dr. Jenny Durrant, and I have worked in museums for around 25 years. I don't look it, but working in curation and collections management. These days, I am a freelance consultant and I support museums around the UK with their collections review and disposal processes. I also have a practical hands-on role because I love collections so much, can't get away from it. And I'm the collections officer at Jane Austen's house here in Hampshire. I think, like most people here today, I am absolutely fascinated by objects, by things, and how humans interact with the stuff in our world and how they perceive things to be interesting or valuable or important or not. And I think that is the big question that we are all sort of facing today working in museums. I specialise in disposal and the benefits that it brings to museums and to practitioners as individual people as well. And as a shameless self-promotion, my book, Deaccessioning Museum Objects, is on sale now from Routledge and all other online retailers. As Sarah said, this panel is slightly different as we are going to be taking questions for the three panelists during the session. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, or if you feel brave enough later, please raise your hand and you can come on and ask it directly. The theme for this session is finding meaning and purpose through disposal. And I think we're all very familiar with disposal now as a collections management practice. There have been numerous workshops and conferences about it in the last few years. We have the latest iteration of the Museums Association guidance that came out a couple of years ago. We know that we need to be sorting out the collections a bit. What I want to focus on in this session is how does collections review and object removal support the functioning of each individual museum and its mission to use its collections to interact with people. So I will stop talking and I am delighted to welcome our three panelists in no particular order. We have Kate Watts, Inbal Livney and Katerina Scott. They come from a range of institution types, locations, funding and workforce, and they represent a great diversity of our UK museums. All are currently doing collections review and disposal processes, and it's been my privilege to work with them in different ways over the last couple of years. So to open up, I am just going to ask each of you to say hello. And in one sentence, can you say just briefly where you are in your disposal practice? I'm going to start with Kate as you're the first on my screen.
Hello, hi. My name's Kate. I've been curator at the National Tramway Museum in Cryche in Derbyshire for the past 4.5 years. We have over 80 trams in our collection, plus photographs, archival material and smaller objects. And as most people, we're very pushed for space, so we are starting to look at could some of those items be rehomed better with other museums or other organisations. And we have currently got 2 trams up for disposal, which we are looking to rehome.
Thank you, Kate. Next on my screen, Katerina.
Hi there, Katerina Scott. I'm a volunteer curator at Metheringham Airfield Vista Centre, which is an airfield-based museum on the former RAF Metheringham airfield, a World War II airfield in Lincolnshire. And we're at the very beginning stage of our sort of disposals journey. We're really at the documentation stage, having completed an inventory, which has, along with a couple of other activities, has released some ideas following training with Jenny as to our sort of where we go from here, really.
Thank you, Katerina. And last but not least, Inbal.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. My name is Inbal Livni. I'm Senior Creative Lead at Manchester Art Gallery, which is a local authority, part of Manchester City Council, their main cultural collection. And we're at the end of it feels like we were never going to get there, at the end of a big programme of collection review, and we are starting to let things go. And a phrase we're using a lot in the gallery at the moment is, if you love it, set it free, which I think sums up where we've come to in our approach versus where we started.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'm going to start with a question again to you all. Very briefly, what was the main reason for starting your review and disposal process when you did? Because we all know these things need happening. Why does it happen now? Who would like to go first? Inbal?
So the catalyst for our review was that our offsite store, where most of our collections are kept, had water coming in from above and below and needed to be emptied so that refurbishment could happen. And we knew it was going to be a once in a work lifetime opportunity to really get everything out of the building, have everything pass through a set of hands, especially those things that had slowly worked their way to the very deepest, darkest storage areas. And that if we didn't do this now, they were going to go back. And this was an issue we were going to kick down the road to our future selves. And that didn't feel like the right thing to do.
Thank you. Kate, do you want to?
Yeah, okay. Well, we've sort of got two distinct areas, actually. One is similar to Inval's in that we have an offsite store, which is quite a large sort of warehouse type building, which we are going to need to vacate in the next couple of years to relocate everything from there. So obviously we're now looking at, we don't want to be spending lots of time and money physically moving some very big heavy items if we actually don't need them or want them in the future. The second one is actually, it didn't really start purposefully as a collections review or disposal project. It was really just coincidental that my colleagues started physically reorganising quite a very small storage space just to sort of rehouse the items better. And she started to come across things that were raising flags of, why on earth have we got this? So we thought, rather than turning it into a project, we would sort of extract them as she was going through and try and deal with them as we found them, rather than putting them to one side to come back to later. So it was sort of indirect, but we thought we'll, take the ball by the horns and try and do some small scale, potentially easy disposals while we can. So that's our two bits.
Brilliant, thank you. Katerina, how about you?
Yes, similar to Kate in a way. The first was really not finishing. My collections manager probably say we've never finished, but almost finishing the inventory project, which we started with the Banish the Backlog programme back in 2019. And it left us at the end of that with a whole series of temporary numbers, which is part of our project to look at those and what we do with them. But then, similar to Kate, we had a store move because previously quite a few of our items were in one of the wartime buildings, single skinned, not insulated, really not good for the artifact. So we did a store move into a temporary container, which is slightly better. but that highlighted, oh, that's interesting, didn't know that was there, and that sort of popped up all these different items that as we were moving them, that was an interest to us as volunteers, because we're volunteer led and run throughout. And then thirdly, we've got a crane project. So this is a project to restore a rare crane that was used by the RAF during wartime. And a previous group of volunteers had removed parts from the crane, obviously to then restore the main body of it. But then it was, what do we do with these parts? So that was another question of what should we do, and looking at and how we're going to tackle that. So it's like a threefold project that is not a project, but you know what I mean.
Brilliant. I think that the common theme that runs through this and will be familiar to other people is that lots of these processes have started from a lack of storage space, or a catalyst of stores moves or running out of space. And for some of you, like Kate, that has been a process to tackle it as you go. Whereas INBAL, you've been able to get some project funding to tackle it as a sort of specific standalone task. I think the question that I'd like to sort of move on to here would be, beyond that catalyst of physically removing material from your collection because you need to move stores or because you're running out of space, how or if collections review and disposal has changed your museum? Has it impacted on a wider scale beyond that storage aspect? INBAL's nodding, so I'm going to go to her and give Katerina and Kate a moment to think about that.
Fundamentally, yes. When we started this project, so for some context, we have quite a big team. I mean, they would say, how can you say that? There's never enough people. But, you know, compared to a lot of people who are part of this conference, we have quite a big team. And there was a lot of fear about doing this project. There were a lot of people in the team, especially the curatorial team, who've been with the organisation a really long time and you know, have these relationships with these collections. And so the idea that it not being held within our domain is quite frightening. So I think the things that doing this project has done that has changed the organisation, one is putting in place really clear procedures and protocols and systems has taken out a huge element of fear. And Jenny's help was a big part in that, because what it's shown the team is, hang on a minute, everyone from the top down is supportive of us doing this process. And it's not on me as a curator to, on my own, make a decision about what we do. And that means that in a year's time, 5 years' time, someone's not going to come banging on the door and I'm going to get a kicking because I made the wrong decision. That's definitely where the team started from. And, you know, that's my job in all of this, is to sort of be that buffer and say, actually, I've signed it off as the lead of the service. And, you know, I've used your expertise to support making that decision. I think the other thing that it's done is it's massively brought together our learning and curatorial teams. And I think there was always a shared sense of purpose, but it has been reinvigorated by this process, which I think is really, really important. So part of our framework for review, and it's all on our website if anyone wants to have a look, is that each review has a team that does the review, and it's a combination, often, not always, but often, of learning and curatorial. So the driver for how we make our decisions is about public benefit and purpose. And that's not solely curatorial. It's curatorial, it's learning, it's conservation. And all of that has to come together. So it's transformed how those teams work together, and it has created a lot of newfound respect between those teams that maybe, you know, was never not there, but it has reinvigorated that. And I think the third thing it's done is it's really made people grapple with what our collection is for. And so as we come out of doing this big piece of review, and we will do more, but as we come out of this particularly big piece of review, we're rewriting our programming strategy. We're thinking about what the next iteration of our collections development policy needs to be. So it's been a catalyst for lots of different things.
That's really, really encouraging to hear. Thank you. I love that idea that by doing disposal, you're breaking down those sort of in-house silos and helping people understand all the different parts of museum activity, and then through that helping out people outside the museum to understand and engage with that as well. Who would like to go next? Kate, Katerina. This question of how has disposal changed your wider practices? Kate's nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sort of similar really to what Inbal was saying. It's just having disposal as a more recognised and normalised sort of process within the organisation. I think with us, any disposals have to be agreed first by a collections management committee, and then they go up to the board ultimately. But I think since we've started looking at this sort of more proactively in the last couple of years, we've made sure that it's an agenda item every single time. We've always got something to say, this is something we're suggesting for disposal to have a look at. So I think it's that attitude, trying to change the way of thinking that it's doesn't have to be a special project. It should be a part of routine work, to keep looking at stuff and looking at what have we got it for, and if it's something that we've never used and we're never likely to use, how can you justify to me why we've got it and we're taking up this precious storage space that we need to make room for things that we want to keep collecting now actively as well. It's just getting it into everybody's mindset that it is something that has to be looked at and we can't ignore it. And I think people have I've been quite surprised that people have been quite amenable to that and sort of understood it quite objectively. So that's been, quite a nice thing to learn within our own sort of teams of many volunteers and different committees and things as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Katerina, how about you and your museum?
Well, as I said at the beginning, we're at the early stages of this. So really, being at the beginning, it's that planning stage and really updating our documentation, because as we've looked at these things and we've done the inventory, we've done that sort of skim look at everything, literally just listed it. Whereas now we're going back, especially starting off with the T numbers, it's helping us to look in depth at each of those objects and really think about it and what information we've got, and almost documenting the documentation, if you know what I mean. But through those processes, and we're developing the processes with what we've obviously got already, but we're honing them to our needs, because we can't keep everything. And one of the training mantras that came out of or the phrases that came out of the training with Jenny and museum development was the importance, relevance and useful, and that really helped to focus our collections development policy, which can be quite daunting for people to understand that sort of thing. So having something simple such as importance, relevance and useful, that's something that volunteers can really sort of get their handle on and think, yes, okay, I can think about that, and it is quite important and it is quite relevant, but how are we going to use it? So therefore, when we look at this decision tree further down the line, is it going to meet all the criteria that we're looking at? And I think the key thing with this is that it's got us looking at the objects in more detail and focusing on them through this type of project, which I think, previously it's on a shelf, you don't really sort of see it, well, lots of other things, but really focusing on the object themselves.
Thank you. In a couple of minutes, we're going to come to questions from the floor. I just want to ask another question to the panel first, which sort of speaks from what you've been saying, especially Katerina, about how disposal is making you look at acquisition differently. And I know in museums, there is always a focus on acquiring things and new acquisitions. And as we've said this morning, funding bodies love to fund new acquisitions, but nobody likes to fund the disposal part necessarily. And it's something we don't shout about. How do you perceive disposal as altering your perception of acquisition? Are they two separate practices, collections management practices, or what is their relationship and their interplay between the two? That's a big question, which I didn't necessarily put in my notes about what I might ask. Sorry to land it on you.
I can go on from
Please do.
my previous one because that links in really with my sort of trying to simplify things, not too simple, but obviously because we're all volunteers and we get new people in all the time and it's an ebb and flow. And some long-standing people have in their mind as well, you know, oh, we've got to keep this and we've got to have that. And really, by having this really clear, what's important, relevant and useful, helps new items to be considered into the collection as well, and helps volunteers to understand, okay, yes, maybe that is really relevant to our collections development policy. And actually, is it something that it is one of those things we want to acquire and we do want it? But actually, through disposal, we're thinking about, well, have we got any room for the stuff anyway? You know, we're very small, literally two small containers to keep all our objects in, and for the team to work on a Saturday during the day. There's a lot to consider that maybe, you know, we core work goes on behind the scenes and we're not always seen as to all the things we're doing. So I think, yeah, the more we can, the power of the object to speak for itself through us, I think, relevant or not relevant, useful, not useful, etc., is very beneficial.
Thank you. I love that phrase, letting the object speak for itself through us. I think that's really, really lovely turn of phrase there. Kate or Inbal, have you got anything pressing to respond to that, or shall I go to questions from the floor? Looks like, oh,
sorry. I was just going to say that I think they're both of equal importance, but for us, and I can only speak in the context of Manchester Art Gallery, they are two separate processes, and actually doing this work is what's confirmed for us that they're two separate processes. So we were slightly bundling things together, and then it felt a bit one in, one out, and actually we have kind of separated them as process, but I think giving them equal importance is what's key.
Thank you. Okay, Kate, any response to that, or?
Just to say that I've learned to say no a lot more. And to try to prevent, you know, these problems for future people. Not just something that might be nice to have, but does it actually have a reason to be in the collection? And if it's a no, then yeah, being better at saying no.
So yeah, so disposal here is helping your institutions focus on the mission of what you're about and why you exist and why these things need to be in museums or have a better afterlife somewhere else instead. I think that's really strong message to bring from this, that disposal is about museum mission and purpose and helping us achieve that. Sarah, I wonder if we have some questions from the chat, if it might be a good time to ask some of those.
Yes, so we have questions in the Q&A area, and also I can see Rupert, who spoke earlier, has a hand up. So maybe if we start with the typed questions, and then if you let me or Rupert know when you're ready for Rupert to come in. So Natasha in the Q&A asks, this is a question for Inbal. Natasha says, it's really interesting that you mentioned that your disposals project brought the curatorial and learning teams together, and they're wondering how the learning team was brought in and what exactly did they contribute when it came to the disposals process.
Thank you. So when we started this project, the first thing we did was set up a steering group that collectively built the framework that we then followed. And it was really important for us that our programming team as a whole, so collections and learning together, curatorial and collections management and conservation, all came into that together. And I think historically a focus for disposal had been on, and bear in mind we're an art gallery, had been on kind of artistic merit and some very curatorially focused and traditional ways of looking at the collection. And actually what our learning team was saying was, well, hang on a minute, actually we're quite bored of using the same kind of pre-Raphaelite paintings that adorn all the walls, and actually we're really interested in using this thing in the corner that you don't want to display, and it's a little bit scruffy, but actually we can use it in this particular way, and just came to it with a completely different view. So their input from the off was really, really important. And then when it came to doing the reviews, for certain reviews, there were real strong collaborations. So for our, we did a review of our furniture, that was one of the reviews. And we worked really, really closely with design students at Manchester Met University. And it was the learning member of that team who specialises in young people who kind of really drove that. And we set kind of live briefs for these design students as part of the collection review, because we wanted to kind of know, well, what were these future designers going to want in a museum collection for them to be able to sort of study and think about. So every stage has had quite a combined approach, and it has been really, really beneficial.
Thanks, Inval. Jenny, should we go to Rupert now? And
Yes,
then
let's go over to Rupert.
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to duplicate Sarah Baldwin's question in the chat, or at least the organisers' chat. What proportion of collections have been proposed for disposal? How much space have you freed up? Have you been able to put a financial figure on the impact?
That's an interesting question. And again, it's coming back to that space question, which for me does not always have to be the catalyst for disposal. I will reiterate, when we're trying to change mindsets here, that there are other reasons, but it's a very valid question. Would anyone like to answer? Have you got any figures in your head about percentages and numbers of things? It might be quite a tricky one. Inval's looking slightly hopeful.
I'm going to try, but I don't really have an answer, but I'm going to try, because I feel like this is something we'll look at the end and kind of go back and review. But the furniture's been grouped, and things where we sort of, so for example, we have a group of furniture that came out of a hall in Manchester, and we're deaccessioning it, but then it's going back to the people who have the hall now. And so out of a group of 2/3 of that particular collection is going to be disposed of, probably. In other areas, it's not quantity, its size will make the big difference. So we do have some enormous things that will probably leave us, and that will have a huge impact, because we actually just don't, frankly, have anywhere to put them now that the stores have been resealed and all the material is going back in. There is no longer a space for those things. So the impact will be really big, even if the quantity of material on a sort of number by number item basis is not. But I can give that information when we get to the end.
Thank you, Inval. If I might just jump in, I've been scrolling through the questions, and there's one that speaks quite directly to something I wanted to ask. It's from Catherine Casely. I hope I've pronounced your surname correctly. And it's for all of the panelists, and it's talking about communication and transparency, which was something that was raised this morning. Have you had any negative press reactions or from previous donors or the public? So I think I'd like to rephrase that one. What has the response been from the people that you have shared this information with? Who have you spoken to about your disposals process, and what has been their reaction? Katerina, would you like to start? So I know you've been talking a lot with your volunteers who work at your museum.
Yes, yeah, that's been the main start, because we're at the beginning of this process. It's really with the volunteers, so that we can all understand what it is that we're doing, because it's a new thing for us. So I think it's been really helpful. We haven't been talking outside of the organisation at all yet, so it's literally just getting all our ducks in a row for how we're going to do things and what we're going to do. But it's been interesting talking to the volunteers about the particular objects, and then the importance that they're putting on them, or not realizing the importance until they start looking at them. So, for example, one which I'll just tell you about was as part of the crane, there's some parts, and they literally look like a dump of rusty bits. And so that looks like they're all going to go. But actually, when we started looking at them with volunteers on a one-to-one basis, somebody picked up this particular piece and said, "Oh, that looks very much like such and such," and they took it to a picture and said, "That's actually part of the original artifact, the part of the original crane." And they were so excited that they'd found something that really we could then utilise later on down the line, which we're hoping to maybe put together a reconstruction of the parts in a reflection of what the vehicle was like in the past, but not necessarily on the vehicle. So it's really opened up some discussions and about that, the particular objects themselves, as well as looking at the process. I don't know whether that's answered your question, but
brilliant. Yeah, changing attitudes and understandings of things is absolutely core to doing this collections review and removal process. Kate, can I sort of ask you, when you've been talking with trustees or committees or outside people, what's the response been to your work?
I think the sort of smaller items so far have been fairly non-controversial, and to be honest, that side of things we haven't really communicated that much outside of the organisation. That is something I think we need to do better. However, the trams, which are slightly harder to, secretly get rid of, not that we'd want to do that, of course, but that's probably the area that we potentially might attract more criticism of, because obviously tramway enthusiasts are very passionate and emotional about the trams in our collection. So to say that we are, getting rid of two is, so far we haven't had too much backlash. We have advertised it quite publicly in terms of like heritage transport circles and other organisations and things. So it is out there in press releases and things. But I think people so far seem to understand the reasons. And I mean, our constitution is a little bit strange in that our membership have to actually vote to agree to disposal of any trams in the collection. So obviously we did have to make a good case to convince them to vote at an AGM to agree to it in the first place, which they did. So, obviously there were a lot of people who didn't agree, but we did get a majority vote. So we obviously managed to put forward a compelling enough argument for why these two particular vehicles were no longer required in it. Although they will give us a lot of space or more space, that is not the motivating factor. It's because they're just simply not needed within the collection anymore, and hopefully they can be used by somebody somewhere to actually give them a new life. That's the intention, and that's how we're trying to phrase it, that they've just been sat in storage for years and they're never going to come back to us. So somebody out there could make use of them for the public to actually access them and see them, hopefully. So yeah.
Fantastic, thank you, Kate. And I love that comment about sort of giving things new life. And I'm looking at the questions again that are in the Q&A. There are so many. I'm afraid we're not going to get through most of them. One of the questions that strikes me, and a few people have asked this, is about where these objects are going to. And I know lots of you aren't at the stage yet where things have gone to their new place. So I want to pick up on this idea of reflection and imagination that Gabby and the panellists sort of proposed to us this morning. When we're thinking of an object being outside of the museum, leaving the context of the museum, having a new life somewhere, how do you imagine that being? Where would you like your objects to have a new life? Is it a happy place? Do some of them need to go onto the skip and die? What's your vision for the future?
I'll go. So I think this is a great question, and although I'm responsible for a collection in an art gallery, I am an anthropologist by training, and the idea that objects have lives is really important to me. And we've had this conversation a lot in the art gallery about, is it better for an object to have a really bright but short life, or a long but dull life where nobody can love it? And so we are kind of grappling with that at the moment. So one of the projects that's come out of our collections review is something called Artworks in Schools, and we're about to launch a nice website for it and whatnot. And it is a revival of a school loan scheme, but for the 21st century. So one of the collections we've reviewed was a schools loan scheme that went out of use. And what's different is this isn't just about art going into schools and sitting on the walls and maybe someone looks at it and maybe they don't. Artists are going into schools, contemporary artists are going into schools with the artworks. And so we've talked a lot, we've got a lot of works on paper
Fantastic. Thank you, Inbal. I'm aware we've only got 2 or 3 minutes left, and I wanted to sort of bring this back to a practical level, that if there is something that delegates can take away from this session about how they can start embedding disposal in their own museum process. Final question for you all. I'll ask you in turn. What do you wish you'd known when you started? Kate, you're first.
Probably the time it takes if you are looking to rehome stuff, you know, and the amount of time it can take to try and track down potential new places and things like that, but also that you have to draw the line somewhere and be reasonable and practical, and you can't just go on forever, you know, and not sort of beat yourself up over it if you can't find a new use for something. But also, I think, turning it on its head slightly, what I've found is talking to other people has been really helpful, and finding that we're not alone, and lots of people are tackling these issues, and, you know, having safe spaces to talk about disposals and bringing it out in the open more has been very therapeutic.
Wonderful. Museums are good therapy for everyone, including those who work in them sometimes, which is wonderful. Katerina, can I ask you, what do you wish you had known when you were starting this?
That we're still starting it. Yeah, I think it's taught me to look far more in depth at each particular object, or at the parts of the object in the case of the crane, and really think about, you know, these objects, although they might look like a rusty pile, actually, if you document them and take as much information as you can about them, photograph them, describe them, then you've got a digital record, taking photographs, etc., digital record, even a 3D scan of these objects, and then potentially we could virtually recreate them, even if they're not physically able to be recreated. So I think the objects have a new life in a different way rather than in its original form. The other thing I would say is that we're part of the object's life, and so that's something that I think our volunteers have realised, that we're part of its journey, wherever that might be, wherever it ends up.
Brilliant, thank you, Katerina. And Inbal, we are at time. Do you have two or three words of what you wish you'd known?
How emotive the whole subject is, and I think someone's put it in the chat, and I'm just going to really quickly plug that we're actually holding a workshop in January for sector colleagues about that whole issue of comms and the emotive nature of disposal, and hopefully Collections Trust will help share that when it comes about.
Fantastic, thank you, Inbal. Very much looking forward to that event in January. So Sarah, I think we are at time, and back to you.